When students are beginning anatomy and physiology, very often they remark that they feel like they're learning a new language. Well, they are, and you will too. So we learn a lot of terminology so that we can discuss the human body correctly and so that everyone knows exactly what we're talking about. So to begin, let's define anatomy and physiology. So anatomy is simply the study of form and structure of the human body and the body parts. Physiology examines how those body parts function. Now, even though we define them separately, they really go together. They're interrelated because form follows function. Think about the body parts you use to type on a keyboard. You don't use your elbow. You don't use your pancreas. You use your fingers. They do the job best. They function because of their form to do the job that you need. Look at the bottom image here with the teeth. So in the back of your mouth, you have those crushers and grinders. They're big teeth with sort of flat, lumpy-like surfaces that allow us to crush and grind food. But look at the front, the anterior part of the mouth. You see those sharp chisel-like incisors. They're thin, sharp, like the blades of a knife. So we use those teeth to cut and to tear pieces of food off. Now, what if your molars were in the front and your incisors were in the back? Yeah, but you wouldn't be eating very much corn on the cob or apples, right? So form follows function. The way things are made allow them to do the job they need to do. Both anatomy and physiology are very, very large fields of study, so it's helpful to subdivide them into smaller areas of content. For example, microscopic anatomy looks at things that are too small for us to see them without some sort of tool like a microscope. So we can prepare tissues or cells, and using a microscope we can visualize them, again, because they're too small for the naked eye to see. Cytology is the study of body cells and the internal structure of those cells. So at the very bottom here, you see several different types of cells. We'll study each one of these throughout A&P 1 and 2. Histology, on the other hand, is the study of tissues. But tissues are made up of cells. So histo refers to tissue. And if you look at this image, you see there are cartilage cells here, and you've got some epithelial cells at the upper part of the image. These come together to form tissues. Gross anatomy, on the other hand, is big stuff. Not yucky stuff, gross, right? So gross anatomy is the study of things that are large enough to be visible to the unassisted or unaided eye. For instance, the heart, your intestines. We can see those, your skin. All of those are gross anatomy. Very often specimens will be dissected for examination so that we can see the internal organs and the internal pieces, anatomy, right? In addition to that, we can divide even gross anatomy into smaller categories. Guys, the human body is amazing and there's so much to study. So by having these different divisions and different categories, it helps us to take that great big elephant and break it into smaller pieces of the elephant. So systemic anatomy studies all of the organs in a particular body system. For instance, the urinary system studies the kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra. It's not worried about how they do their job. That's physiology. It's looking at how they're made. Regional anatomy looks at the structures of a particular body area. For instance, thoracic anatomy refers to the structures in and of the chest, the lungs, the heart, the trachea, and so forth. Surface anatomy focuses on the superficial anatomical markings that relate to things inside the body. For instance, have you ever wondered why when you go into the doctor's office and they want to listen to your heart, they put the stethoscope on 4 different locations? That's because those 4 locations are marked by the spaces between your ribs, superficial anatomy, telling them what's going on inside the internal body structures. You have 4 heart valves. So by placing the stethoscope on those locations, superficially, they can hear the internal flow of blood through those valves. Comparative anatomy looks at different species. For instance, if we are learning blood vessels in A&P 2, and obviously we don't have cadavers in our lab, so we can't look at human blood vessels, but we can look at the blood vessels in our laboratory cats. And we can see there are many similarities in the pathway of blood flow, as well as a few differences. I mean, obviously you'd expect a few differences, right? If you look at the picture of the rat up here, the organs are arranged a little bit differently than they are in the human. And embryology is the study of the changes that happen from the time a baby is conceived, we call that conception, to birth. There are several different stages and several different structures that are formed during that period, and embryology looks at those. Anatomical divisions that focus on diagnosing illness or disease or research to try to find cures and treatments for those include pathological anatomy, which looks at the big picture, macroscopic, as well as the things we can't see, microscopic changes that happen when we have a particular disease. Radiographic anatomy allows us to be able to visualize internal structures using several different types of technology. One of the more common that we're all aware of course, would be X-ray technology, but there's also ultrasound, MRIs, PET scans, and CT scans. Just as we saw with anatomy and several different branches of anatomy, same with physiology. But physiology is not looking at the structure. Physiologists look for the function of body structures, and function is going to be related to the molecular or chemical composition as well as the cellular level of structure. So you've got to have a basic knowledge of chemistry and cells. So we're going to have some chapters here at the beginning of the semester that really lay that foundation for us. So as we begin talking in more detail about the human body, you'll understand it at the cellular level as well as the chemical level. Now, we covered just a select few of the branches of anatomy, so we'll do the same with physiology. Now, keep in mind again, guys, we're only covering a few of these. There are many, many, many different ways to study anatomy and physiology. Cardiovascular physiology examines the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. How does the heart function? What is it that the blood does? How does it maintain blood pressure along with the vessels and the heart? So there are many things to look at with cardiovascular physiology and many subdivisions within cardiovascular. Other physiologists may look at the nervous system. Neurophysiology studies the functioning of the nerves and the brain, the spinal cord, and the organs associated with control, communication, and coordination of the human body. Respiratory physiology is looking at how gases are exchanged. We bring in oxygen and exhale CO2 using the respiratory systems, and that gas exchange happens in the lungs. There are many things that play a role in that. You'll learn more about that in AP 2. Reproductive physiology looks at, you got it, how we make babies. So it's the functioning of the reproductive hormones and the reproductive cycle that includes how we make sperm cells and egg cells and all of the chemicals, hormones, and enzymes that play a role in that process. So the regulation of the reproductive system. And pathophysiology, pathology refers to the study of disease. So patho is disease. So pathophys is looking at the relationship between the functioning of an organ or organ system and disease or injury that may affect the way that system or that organ does its actual job. This is from your textbook, and it's one of the concept overviews that spans 2 pages in each of your chapters. It compares how anatomists and physiologists would examine the same exact thing in the human body. So we're looking at the small intestine. Well, obviously the anatomists are going to focus on the form and the structure of the small intestine. So all of this over here with the bluish gray boxes, that's all anatomy. So study of the small intestine, including how it interacts with other organs in the body, the different layers of the intestine and what they're made of, how they are put together in relationship to each other. Anatomists would also study the tissues of the small intestine and the cells that compose those tissues. Physiologists, on the other hand, are going to focus on the function of the small intestine. And for instance, examine how the muscles of the small intestine contract to push through the food that is in the small intestine, so it passes through the digestive tract. Physiologists would also look at the mechanisms that we use to break down the food products that we eat. I mean, think about it. If we eat a cheeseburger, we're eating cow muscle. We can't use cow muscle. We use our mouth and our teeth and all that to break it down, but we've got to break it all the way down into its tiny little chemical components so that we can utilize those. And that action of how that occurs would be studied by the physiologist. Also, the physiologist would be looking at how those nutrients are absorbed across the walls of the intestine and then get out to the body cells that need it. So anatomists and physiologists have to know not only something about anatomy or physiology, but they need to know both because, as I mentioned before, you can't really separate the two. Form follows function. Okay, so here in chapter 1, I just pulled together some of the questions from your textbook that would have been covered in the little "What did you learn?" or "What did you think?" boxes that are scattered throughout each of your chapters. Now, I will not include these in every chapter on the PowerPoints or the videos. They are in your textbook, and I do encourage you, as you're going through your text and reinforcing the content that we cover in our lectures, consider these questions. Can you answer these? If you can answer these questions and do a good job on them, you're learning and preparing for the exams that I'm going to be giving you. Now, I don't take your exams from these questions, and I don't use these questions on my exams. I prepare your exams from what I teach you, from what I talk about with you, either on these videos or in my classroom. But these will help you identify areas where you're confident and you know you've learned it versus those areas that maybe you need to go back and study a little bit more.